Well, we are moving our way through Acts, and this is where we are today. We started in Jerusalem and then moved to Judea and Samaria and then to the remotest parts of the earth, and now we're in chapter 25 and 26. And ironically, we are back from the remotest parts of the earth, and we're in Israel again. So Paul has finished his 3 missionary journeys. He's come all the way back to Israel. The Lord has led him back to Jerusalem. He got in a lot of hot water when he got back to Jerusalem, if you've been reading with us. And now he's in chains in Caesarea, in the regional governing center of Israel with the Romans, and he's still in hot water there. Last week, we saw how he spent a bunch of time with Festus, or with Felix, the governor of the area. He's been replaced. So let me just kind of catch us up on the geography and the history, and then we can see what God's got for us here. But before we get to that, 25 years prior to today's passage, 25 years prior, Jesus said this. He said in Matthew 10, "But beware of men, for they will hand you over to the courts and scourge you in their synagogues, and you will even be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles." So today, you're going to be brought before governors and kings, and that's exactly what happens today as we look at it. Paul is going to be brought before governors and kings, and who in specific? Governor Festus and King Agrippa. And we're going to see what happens in the whole interchange. We read it earlier, but what Paul reveals is a brand new piece of information in terms of his conversion experience. So we're going to look at that more closely today. So here's the land. This is Israel today from Google Earth, from about 30 miles out in space. There's the Sea of Galilee flowing through the Jordan River down to the Dead Sea. There's Israel, Jordan, and Syria. Okay, we've got our geography straight. Sort of. You've seen this an awful lot by now. Okay, and where we are today is on the coastal city of Caesarea up here. Again, it's sort of the Roman center of governing for this whole region of Palestine at the time. And we have right there the governor, Felix. From this day on, you'll always remember the name of the governor in there. It's Felix. But it turns out in today's passage, chapter 25, we're going to go through chapter 25 pretty quickly. Festus arrives to relieve Felix. So Festus comes in. There we go, okay? So who are the 2 Roman governors you know about in Acts? Festus and Felix. Felix and Festus. Okay. Festus arrives and he replaces Felix, and immediately he goes to Jerusalem because he's going to unwind this whole tangle with this little guy who's in jail there in Caesarea, this little guy Paul, and find out what's going on. He seems to have a beef with the people in Jerusalem. So being a really good governor, days after he comes into town, he goes to Jerusalem to try and unwind this, okay? And in the process, he says, follow me back to Caesarea and we'll try him up there. He goes back to Caesarea in just about a week's time, and the important guys from Jerusalem follow him so they can have a trial for Paul. Chapter 25, verse 7, there's the trial of Paul that finishes with the very end thing where Paul says, I appeal to Caesar. And those 4 words are very powerful. For a Roman citizen, if you don't feel like you're getting justice where you're at, you can appeal up higher in the chain. Well, higher in the chain from the governor of Palestine is Caesar himself. So he says, I appeal, I need to go to Caesar. And Festus, being the right kind of governor, says, okay, so you're going to go to Caesar. End of trial. Now, it turns out that a guy named Agrippa, King Agrippa and Bernice come to visit. They come into town in Caesarea, and when they come into town, Paul takes the opportunity to explain what all this uproar is about. Who is this Paul guy? Why is he going to Caesarea? And what's his chief beef with the local people here? And Agrippa is intrigued, because Agrippa has history with Paul. So he says, I want to hear him myself. So Festus says, okay, we'll have an inquiry. It's not a trial now, it's kind of an inquiry. And because remember, they finished the trial. Paul finished the trial saying, I want to go see Caesar. Festus says, okay, you're going to go see Caesar. We're going to give it to him. So Agrippa can't really try it. So they have an inquiry. And part of the inquiry is because Festus says, you know what? I'm going to look like an idiot if I take Paul, I put him on a boat, I send him to Caesar and say, Caesar, you try this guy. And in the letter, when I say, Caesar, you try this guy, I don't tell him what the charges are. Even up to this point, Festus doesn't have a clue what the charges are to bring. So you don't just send a prisoner to Caesar, say, Caesar, you try him, but by the way, we don't know what to charge him with. Well, how's Caesar supposed to do that? Festus is going to look like an idiot. So he says, let's have an inquiry. And, oh, great King Agrippa, since you are a local guy here, maybe we can figure out some charges to write down on a piece of paper to send with Paul. So that's actually the point of today's thing in chapter 26. Just figure out some charges to write on a piece of paper so Caesar can read it. By the way, the Caesar at this time is, you know which Caesar it is? It's a trivia question. Nero. Nero is Caesar right now. So we've gone through Augustus at the time of Jesus' birth, through Tiberius, his nephew, and after Tiberius, to Caligula, after Caligula, his uncle Claudius, and after Claudius, his nephew or cousin, I think it's his nephew, Nero. That's where we're at right now. So anyway, that's what's going to happen. We come into chapter 26. We start the inquiry, and Agrippa, who is the actual highest-ranking person in the room, gives Paul permission to speak, which is how it works. You don't speak unless the king allows you. And he says to Paul, verse 1, you are permitted to speak for yourself. And so Paul then stretches out his hand, which is a way of saying, shh, everyone be quiet now. Stretches out his hand and proceeds to make his defense. And he says in verse 2, in regard to all the things of which I am accused by the Jews, I consider myself fortunate, King Agrippa, that I'm about to make my defense before you today. He's actually being straight up about this because remember, Festus has heard the whole thing as a Roman, not a Jew, and he's clueless about what's going on. He said, I don't even know what to charge him when we send him to Rome. But Agrippa, different kind of a thing. Agrippa actually is a blood Jew. So he's saying, this is a good deal. You might understand what's going on. I'll make my defense before you today. And it goes on in verse 3 and says, especially because you are an expert in all customs and questions among the Jews. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. So he's saying, you are an insightful Jew. You and your family has been in this area forever. So when I make my plea, you're going to understand it. So please be patient. And at that point, if they had watches, Agrippa would look at his watch and wonder how long this is going to take. So Paul takes off and he starts his defense. Now, I'm not going to cover all of his defense. We read it earlier this morning where he basically just apologizes. He makes a defense for the things or the claims against him, which are all just phony. But I wanted to bring you up to speed a little on Agrippa. Who is Agrippa? Why is he going to be a good hearer in this particular case? And this is just the little 5-minute trivia piece of the morning. So a little bit of history. Who's Agrippa? Well, his name is Agrippa, but his full name is actually Herod Agrippa II. Okay, and Herod is the Jewish king name equivalent of Caesar. So you know there's a bunch of Caesars. Was their first name Caesar? No, their first name was something else. But their role was Caesar as king. Herod is the name of king for the Jewish kings. So he's king, and this picture right here is of a coin that was minted about 20 to 30 years, 20 years after this trial takes place. You can actually read his name on this coin. So I'll say this kind of quickly in passing, but if any religion purports to be historic and doesn't have any historic support, it may not be historic. Here we read about King Agrippa, Herod Agrippa II, and there's a coin with his face on it that's been dug up there. Most false religions that claim to be historical, if they had one of these coins, I would be religion with them today. But they're not. So here we are. That's King Agrippa right there, Herod Agrippa II. Now, his father was Herod Agrippa I, who was the one back in chapter 12 of Acts we were reading that did this. He killed the apostle James, and he also had Peter jailed, intending to kill him as well. Because at the killing of James, everyone loved it. The Jews loved it. Whee, that's great. Do it again. So he takes Peter, puts him in prison, intending to kill him. And what happens to Peter? He dies. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. No, he doesn't. He's let out. Yeah, that's that wonderful section where they're praying for him, and he's out, free. So that's his father, Herod Agrippa I. That's his father. And then his father, if you go up the line, was Herod Aristobulus, which we don't know too much about, because he didn't rule very much. His brothers did. But then if you go up above him is, drumroll, Herod the Great. Herod the Great. Herod the Great is the one who killed all the baby boys around the time Jesus was born, around Bethlehem and around that area, because he heard about it. He's the one that the wise men came to. So this is the nasty guy who killed all of them. He's also the one who's known as being one of the greatest builders in all of Israel. Just if you go to visit Israel today, things that he built are all over the place. He was an incredible builder. So that's the family history of the Herod that we have today. These guys were all genetically Jews. not really faithful followers, but still Jewish to the core, culturally speaking. They understood the religion and all that kind of stuff. A little bit of more trivia. You'll like this. If you go back down to Herod Agrippa down here, he had a sister named Drusilla. Ring any bells? Drusilla, last week, the wife of Felix. Yeah, the governor, the previous governor. His wife is Drusilla, the sister of Herod Agrippa II. Yeah, it's one of those kinds of things, yeah. And then, turns out he's got another sister. On this other side over here, you know what her name is? Bernice. That ring any bells? She's here today. Yeah, that's right. Well, it turns out that Bernice is not the wife of Herod Agrippa that we see in the story, although it looks like it says Agrippa and Bernice came in town. It's a sister. She's actually married to her uncle, Herod Chalcis. I know, nasty. But it turns out that marriage didn't turn out too well, so that kind of fizzled. So what she did is she decided to move in with Herod Agrippa II, her brother. And there was actually some incest there. So the Bernice that we have in the story today is not married to Agrippa. She is his sister, but she is living with him. And more than one Roman historian says, yeah, living with him. So it's not good. So that's the nasty situation of these two that we see today. By the way, she did not get the idea of marrying her uncle by herself. She got it from the previous generation because Herod Agrippa I has a sister named Herodias, and she married her uncle, Herod Antipas. Yeah, kind of nasty. So it's something that the family does. I don't get it. It's really crazy. But actually, she was married to Antipas, but she wasn't married to Antipas. Actually, she was married to another uncle, Herod Philip I. Which means she wasn't really married to Herod Antipas. Not really. She was just kind of living with him, which is why when John the Baptist is jailed by Herod Antipas, he gets all over his case because Antipas is living with his brother's wife. Ring any bells? Yeah, see, it's a tangled web we weave. That's what Antipas is also the one who ends up judging Jesus at the end there with, Pilate and all those trials. So that's the grandfather, well, kind of great uncle of Agrippa II. Whew. Seamy mess, huh? What kind of justice are you going to get on a day like this in front of this guy? Well, I don't know. His whole family is riddled with weirdness. But he does have one thing. He understands Jewish culture. So Paul's going to appeal to that Jewish culture today. Okay, that was a freebie. Let's just move on. Here's the inquiry. We're going to skip to verse 12 after Paul makes his initial defense. He does, okay, now he says up till verse 11, this is what, I didn't do that, but this is what I did do. This is what I did do. Verse 12, here we go. So, while so engaged, I was journeying to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests. And at midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun. Remember, he says it's midday. This is like noon, big sun, shining all around me and those who were journeying with me. So he's going to recount for Agrippa this road to Damascus story. This is the third time this has been documented in the book of Acts. It's the third time. We see a previous time where Paul tells the story in front of another trial, and the first time, the history when it actually happened. This is the third time. So you got to think, maybe this is an important thing to understand about Paul. 3 times, but Paul gives us more information today. So he tells Agrippa, O King Agrippa, I was just doing what the chief priests and all the rulers in Jerusalem wanted me to do. And he's probably, I'd love to see this in a film or movie, he's probably looking at his actual guys who are accusing him. I'm only doing what they asked me to do. These guys, right here. And that's what I was doing. I was one of them. I was their agent to go and find Christians, bring them, try them, kill them. That's what I was doing, he says. So, I'm one of these guys, basically. Verse 14. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew dialect, saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It's hard for you to kick against the goads. That's kind of a euphemism that's not real familiar to us. But basically, if you had an animal that wouldn't move, that was stubborn, you'd stick him with a stick, a goad. And that animal, if it still didn't want to move, what it'd try to do is kick the person with the stick. Which doesn't work very good because you use a long stick. Okay? See, just keep prodding him. So in a way, this is a way in which Jesus is saying to Paul, This is a fruitless, frustrating thing you're trying to do in terms of trying to stop my birthing church. It's not going to work. Stop it, basically. You're persecuting me, Jesus, the guy who you say is dead, and I'm the source of all these myths. Here I am, and you're on your face in the dirt. So quit kind of kicking against the goats, okay? He says, "Who are you, Lord?" And the Lord says, "I'm Jesus, whom you're persecuting." So the story is familiar up to this point. Let's move on. So he goes to verse 16, and Jesus goes on, and this is the fascinating new information we get. Jesus goes on speaking to Paul while Paul's face is in the dirt, midday with this huge light around him, and Jesus says, "Get up and stand on your feet. For this purpose I have appeared to you." What purpose? Oh, we've got to stop right here and ask ourselves, what do you think the purpose is that God revealed to Paul? He's saving Paul at that point. He's stopping him from persecuting the church. And he says, now I'm going to reveal to you my purpose for bringing you to myself. What do you think he would say? Resurrection? Yeah. Life? I'm going to give you life? Maybe? I'm calling you for the purpose of preaching about Jesus.
Yeah, but he's a Jew that's turned
He's
around.
a Jew who's turned around, yeah.
I mean, and he's turned around for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
And somebody that's an about face.
It's-
It's a lie.
It is. It's a huge about face.
Killing them to be him.
You were persecuting Jesus and his followers. Now you're not going to, right? So you're going to cease and desist, because that's me, that's Jesus talking, and completely turn around. Yeah.
I would think that would make the Jewish people think, this guy was once killing these people, now he's...
Exactly. The Jews would respond in a perplexing, intriguing way. This guy used to attack Christians. Now he's one of them.
Yeah, why?
What kind of change happens in a person's life that makes them change around like that and completely repudiate all the religious authorities who previously gave him permission to do this? He was the hotshot go-to man. He was the rising star in the religious establishment. And he's completely rebuked them and gone the other way. The interesting thing is Jesus is going to tell Paul right after this what his purpose is for calling him. And I find this really intriguing because in my life, God seldom tells me the purpose for his calling me too far ahead of time. He does a little bit. And as I sat back thinking about this, I realized that back on the day that I became a Christian, God revealed his purpose for me too, but not fully. Not fully. And because I'll finish this story in a little bit, and remind me if I forget. But when he called me, I was all by myself. I gave my life to him, gave my heart to him, gave my whole future to him in that sense. And the very first thing I remember thinking after saying that, after yielding to him in that sense, I remember saying to him, okay, wait, I've got a problem here. Not that I want to undo what we just did here, Lord, but if I follow you, something tells me that I'll have to speak for you. And God, I don't speak to anybody. At the time, I was 15, 16 years old. I was deeply, deeply shy. I had actually made myself physically ill in some circumstances when I should have spoken up, but I didn't because I was too afraid to speak to people. I could barely speak to individuals. I would never speak to more than 3 or 4 people at a time. It's terrifying. I remember being in school, having tests go down, and we were supposed to do tests, and the teacher would hand out papers, and I didn't have a pencil, and we'd start the test. I had nothing to write with, and I didn't even have enough gumption to raise my hand and say, can I have a pencil? Because I was just too shy to be able to say that. So at this particular transaction, something told me that somehow I was going to have to be speaking on God's behalf, and I said, God, I don't do that. But he didn't say you're not going to. He said, yeah, I know. Well, yeah, and so that's actually the end of the story. Here I am. If at that point in time, God had said, I'm going to reveal my purposes for you, I'm going to have you speaking in front of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people, usually strangers in many contexts, I would have thrown up and said, I don't think so. I would have said, can we re-talk this contract? Because I don't think this is going to work. This is just not right. I mean, really, it would have been so terrifying to me. I mean, absolutely terrifying, unthinkably terrifying, that I probably would have walked away. But there is a sense in which God said, your understanding is true, Your understanding of your purpose is it's really there, but you know what? I'm still asking you, do you want to follow me? Do you want to do your own thing? This is really the choice at that point when I was kind of going to part B of the contract. God was saying, so, okay, wait a second. Do you want to follow me and I'll take you wherever I take you based on my love for you? Or do you want to follow yourself and make sure you never have to go through the stomach turmoil of talking to people for the rest of your life? You can guarantee that, see? You can guarantee that would never have to happen. Which one do you want to do? And at that point, you weigh. Do I know myself better than God knows myself? Answer, no. Do I love myself more than God loves me? Now we're getting to some real trade-offs right here. I think he does. So I'll go his way. 6 months later, I was standing in front of 200 people, talking to them. I don't get it. And from that point on, somehow, God loosed the tongue. I don't know what happened. Well, I do know what happened. He did that. But see, that's the whole idea. When God reveals his purpose to you, he'll reveal just enough for you to be able to handle it. So what does he reveal to Paul right here that Paul can handle it? And I think it's fascinating. Okay, you're dying to know. I am too. Here we go. Let's find out. Verse 16. He goes on. He says, to appoint you a minister and a witness, not only to the things which you have seen, but also to the things in which I will appear to you, rescuing you from the Jewish people, woohoo, and the Gentiles. What? To whom I'm sending you. Okay, stop for a second. I can hear my tires screeching right here. Okay, so I'm going to make you go out and be a witness for what you've already seen. Well, what has he already seen? He's seen the birth of the new church. He stood there holding the coats of people while they were stoning Stephen. He heard Stephen's entire account. Go back to early parts of Acts. He knows what's going on here. We think that Paul actually saw Jesus on some occasions. We don't have any documentation of it, but we think he did. So he has seen a lot. So what Jesus is saying to him is, I want you to tell what you've seen, including this face in the dirt thing right now. Because what is he doing with Agrippa? He's telling what he's seen, right? Tell what you've seen, and then tell what I'm going to show you. And of course, we walked through the 3 missionary journeys, and Jesus has appeared to him and steered him and changed him. I mean, just remarkable kinds of stuff to testify to what God is doing in the churches as they're growing up in age and things like that. So he's going to testify. So for Paul's sake, that's all okay. I can deal with that if I'm Paul. But then what he's saying is, I will be rescuing you from the Jewish people and from the Gentiles, to whom I'm going to send you. Question, why would I need rescuing? Yeah, he sure indeed found out a whole bunch later, Why would I need rescuing from the Jews? I'm one of them. I believe in the law. I'm very well trained in the Old Testament. Why would I need rescuing? And why am I going to the Gentiles? I mean, after all, the Gentiles are dogs. That's literally the word that's used. They're dogs. We were taught in the Old Testament to stay away from the Gentiles because they contaminate us spiritually speaking, and we are pure. We don't want to make ourselves ceremonially unpure by touching a Gentile. And now you're going not only to send me to them, but you're going to rescue me from them too? Is there any friendly crowd you're sending me to? Because half the world is Jews and half the world is Gentiles. So if God's going to rescue from both of them, I'm not going to be popular anywhere now, am I? Exactly. But the good news is, the bad news is, you're not going to be popular anywhere. The good news is, I will rescue you. And of course, we've watched the 3 missionary journeys, and God has rescued him. In this interesting situation he's in right now, he's standing before Agrippa with his hands and feet probably in chains, saying, God's going to rescue you from the Gentiles. You expect a Houdini trick right now, in front of Agrippa. God's going to rescue me from the Gentiles and from the Jews, including you. Ha, pooh, ha! See, God did that. It doesn't happen that way in the story, but actually God does rescue him when it's appropriate, and he's in bonds right now, but that won't persist. It'll go for a while. We know that there's a 4th missionary journey that he'll be free to do. It's not documented in Acts, but from some of his letters we know he does it. So he'll get some of that freedom back. It's all up to God. God will send you to the right people. When they get hostile to you and they decide to arrest you, I'll rescue you from them and free you up to talk to somebody else. That's your future, Paul. That's my purpose for you. I want you to be a shining light testifying about who I am, what you've seen, and what you're going to see. And by the way, they're not going to like hearing it. But some will. See, some will. And I'll rescue you, and I'll rally you to continue doing this. Okay, his purpose goes on. I'm going to actually build this as a little pyramid as we go on, just to kind of keep track, because I liked what he said to Paul. This is just amazing. The first, as we stack this up, as he says after you're testifying, is I'm going to have you be a minister and a witness. That's what he just said. I'm going to have you tell. Now remember, witness is the same word we use in the legal courtroom. If you go across the street and you go to the courtroom and you're called as a witness, if you give hearsay, that is, you hear what someone else said, well, I heard Bill down the street say, the opposing litigators will stand up and say, no, that's hearsay, you can't do that. You can only say what you have personally experienced yourself. What you have seen, what you have experienced. I don't want to hear what you heard Billy say. I want to know what you. So a witness, this is exactly the legal term he's using. He says, I just want you to tell what you see and what you experience. And as a minister, that's actually this nurturing thing to actually grow up the churches as they get. So as you tell what you've experienced, which is exactly what he's doing in front of Agrippa, as you tell what you've experienced, people will respond, and then I need you to kick in the mode where you'll minister and help them. Okay? So that's number one on the pyramid of his purpose for Paul. And I like what he goes on. So that every time you see a 2 right here, that's kind of because that will lead to, verse 18, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light. No. But he's going to open their eyes to this kind of stuff. So the second thing up the pyramid is this exact thing. I'm going to have you be a minister and a witness, but because you're doing that, a blindness is going to be fixed, and they're going to have their eyes opened. You're going to say something. You're going to testify to what your experience with me is, and some people are going to go, oh, I see it, right? I see it. And many of them do. And up through this part in Acts, they see it. Going to open their eyes, which implies that prior to Paul being this witness, their eyes are closed. Can't see it. Even though you might be intellectually informed, you might be a Jew who has great training, you might understand the Old Testament, still, when it comes to Jesus, but I can't see it. But he's the Messiah, Paul would say it in many Jewish contexts. And he would open up the Old Testament and show. Isaiah 53, Psalms, he'd go through and prove, like he did with those guys that when Jesus appeared on the walk to Emmaus with those 2 guys, he opened the scriptures to them and demonstrated that he was the guy in those scriptures. And I'm sure Paul did that here. I don't see it. Blind eyes, couldn't see. But in some cases, as you witness, the eyes will open and go, oh. Now, it's one thing to come to an understanding about who Jesus is. Oh. But that doesn't finish it in the process for you. Because even the demons, James says, they know who Jesus is. They don't have to go, oh. They go, oh, we know who he is. They're fully informed. So the first step is because you witness, people will be fully informed. But there's another step after that then. Once you fully understand who Jesus is and go, oh, what's next? To open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the dominion of Satan to God. So they go from darkness to light. So they open their eyes, and they were previously, when their eyes were closed, in a domain of darkness because their eyes are shut, actually. Into a domain of light. Oh, I see things the way they really are. I have to always go back to camping. Camping is the only time where I'm in utter darkness. And when light in the middle of the night is a wonderful thing. Right? That's usually when you have to go potty in the middle of the night and you're not in a trailer, the potty's way over there and it's extremely dark and there are no street lights and for some reason the moon's not out tonight. And you have to walk across a very hazardous area and try and make your way. A light, a flashlight. Because what it does is it reveals the way things really are, which allows you to not stub your toe in stupid ways. I mean, that's just a perfect metaphor for life. There are people who have their eyes closed, who stub their toes all the time, thinking they know where they're walking, but they can't see. So now we're going to open their eyes. So understanding who Jesus is actually brings us to a point where we open our eyes, see things the way they really are. Now, what are the things we need to see the way they really are? Who we are, how we're made, against many of the lies in the culture. Many of the lies in the culture tell you that man is primarily good. And I'll tell you, if you walk thinking that's true, you're going to be stubbing your toe an awful lot. Because not only is everyone else not good, neither are you. So there's a lot of understanding we gain about the way things really are. God says, you know what? If you want to stay healthy, wealthy, and wise, do these things and don't do these things. Well, who are you to tell me what I should be doing? I'm my own person. Well, it's God's way of saying, you know what? I can save you a lot of toe stubbing if you don't do these things and if you do these things. God's requirements to us, his commandments to us, aren't just because he's an arbitrary God. He's saying, I've made you a certain way. Do these things and you'll live. Don't do these things and you'll die, one stub toe at a time. Open your eyes. Listen to this stuff. You know that the part in the Ten Commandments where it talks about honoring your father and mother? That one says specifically, if you do this, it's really good for you. Which I laugh every time because I can hear an adolescent saying, why? Because it'll be really good for you. And you know, as you grow up and become an adult and you look back to your relationship with your parents, there's times where you really did obey them, which might be less than the opposite side. But when you did, you come away afterwards saying, you know what, I learned a lot from that and I'm glad I honored them at that point. There was life in that even to this day has benefited me. So again, that's what it's light, from darkness to light. He says that this darkness to light is the same thing as going from the domain of Satan to God. That is very strong kingdom language. The domain, the dominion. So before, when your eyes were like this and shut, not only did not you see what was going on, but you couldn't see the fact that you were hopelessly enslaved to the dominion of Satan himself. What? No, I'm just living my life and walking around and I don't see any pitchfork guys around and it's just this neutral life kind of stuff. What do you mean the dominion of Satan? You got to be crazy. And Satan, in his clever, wily hiding ability, says, yeah, that's exactly what I'm hoping you're thinking. There are only two domains. There's only two dominions of kingdoms. Dark and light. Satan or Jesus. It goes back, you can check me on this. I think it's Colossians, the first chapter of Colossians. He says, I'm transferring you from this domain of darkness to the domain of his son, to the light. And that's in the first chapter of Colossians, I think, right? Colossians 1, yeah, okay. So that's really what he's doing. You've only got one of two places to live. There is no neutral zone. There is no Switzerland in spiritual things. There is no neutral zone. You're either under the dominion of Satan himself, who very cleverly likes to not show his face, or you're in the dominion of Jesus. And in the one case, you're going from a domain of darkness, and then you're going to the domain of light. Now, why is the domain of Satan considered darkness? I know that kind of makes sense. You know, if you watch Twilight vampire movies or whatever stuff like that, there's always darkness with the bad side and stuff like that. So it sort of metaphorically seems right. But why is it actually literally right that that's darkness? Yeah. There's a real sense in which Satan wants to keep you in the dark. He doesn't really want you to understand the way things really are. If you understood the way things really are in a spiritual context, you'd wake up some morning and say, oh my gosh, I'm living in the dominion of Satan. What am I thinking? So it's his advantage to keep that kind of hidden in that sense. He'd lose you. Yeah, it'd freak you out. No, I prefer to think that mankind is generally good. The bad stuff is just, it's just sort of random, spurious happenings. Man's basically good. Satan wants to keep you in the dark. In fact, over and over again, when we talk about the character of Satan, you know what the thing is he does behaviorally that determines his character over everything else? He's the father of lies. That's a way of taking the way things really are and putting them in the dark. So you don't really see. If the light was turned on and you saw things the way they really are, and you saw what Satan is telling you they are, you'd say, you're a liar. You are a stinking liar, because that's just not true. So darkness is what he's all about. He doesn't want you to understand the way things really are. And it keeps you in the dark. And in that darkness, you voluntarily cooperate with that prince of the power of the air in your own destruction. In the metaphor Jesus uses about the shepherd and the sheep in John, 10, I think? Is it 10? Thank you. he says that there is another shepherd who comes into the sheepfold, and his entire purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. So as Satan keeps you in the dark about the presence of his dominion, and you think he's not there, he's actively pursuing stealing, killing, and destroying. And because you're ignorant and blind to what's going on, you're voluntarily cooperating the whole way. Until your eyes are opened. And you go, oh my gosh. There is no life in Satan. There's only death and destruction and losing what I've already got. But in Jesus, the Good Shepherd, I come that they might have life and have it abundantly. Big life. Big life. That's what he comes for. Paul, as you minister and witness, eyes will be open. People will see who Jesus really is and go, oh! And in the process of going, oh, they'll see the way things really are. Darkness will suddenly become light and they'll go, oh! And then they'll say, I want Jesus and his kingdom. I want to be his, totally. And they give their life to him and they're out of darkness and they're into life. They're transferred from the kingdom of Satan to the kingdom of God's beloved Son, and there's life. Oh! Have you seen people, have you ever had the great privilege of talking to someone about Jesus and seeing them do this aha, do this, oh, and there's life, there is life. That's a wonderful privilege. Pray that God gives you the chance to do that. It's a marvelous thing. Okay, so Paul, this is what's going on. This is what's at stake with you being a minister and a witness. This is my purpose for you, to transfer people from the dominion of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins. Bingo. You know what? That's what people need. Wow. I thought they needed self-esteem. No. They need forgiveness. Why? Did we do something wrong? Oh, yeah. My eyes are open. My eyes are open not only to the way things are, but the way I really am. My eyes are open to the fact that no matter how hard I try to act good, something about my heart is desperately tainted and dark and black. How is it that there is something so tragically tainted in the inside of who I am that I work 24/7 to keep from percolating out to what my hands do so I don't look like an idiot when I know that inside I am a dark idiot? Wow. And he comes to change that. I need forgiveness of sins. I need some kind of radical dealing with the fact that I am by nature a sinner and not fit to be in the kingdom of the Son. Oh my gosh, I want to be in his kingdom, but I don't qualify. I'm tragically dirty. And no matter how hard I try to change my heart, I can't. It just seems to pop up over and over and over. Man, what's wrong with me? Well, the fall is what's wrong with you. Sin that you inherit as part of the human race is what's wrong with you. I need forgiveness in order to be part of that kingdom. So Paul, as you witness for me and as you say these things, eyes will be opened. They'll be transferred from Satan to God, from darkness to light, and there will be forgiveness. Oh. John the Baptist, when he was walking around doing his ministry, he came to kind of set the stage for Jesus. Do you remember what his ministry was? Baptism, repentance, forgiveness of sins. To give an understanding that that's really the primary need we have in our lives. And he also came to give an understanding about who this Jesus is. There's this guy coming, he says, that I'm not even qualified to untie his sandals. I mean, I'm not the guy. I'm just telling you, you need to get started straight down the road of repentance from what you've done and who you are and toward forgiveness of sins. That's absolutely necessary before you can recognize why Jesus is going to come up right after me. Because he'll pay the price for that forgiveness, right? He goes on and says, this is how he's going to finish it, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and, oh, I like this word, an inheritance among those who've been sanctified by faith in me. So what's an inheritance in human terms right now? It's what you get when someone else dies. And it's been written on a piece of paper that it's coming to you. You know, here's my will. Here's my last will and testament. When I die, I'm giving this much to and this much and this. It's already predetermined. There's this promise that's been made that upon the death, great assets come to you. The nation of Israel, when they thought about what they were getting from God in terms of being the favored people of God, they always thought of it in terms of being an inheritance. After all, We're in the family of God. We're Jews. We come back from Abraham. A promise was made back there, kind of like an inheritance, saying that all along the way, if you're part of this Jewish mainstream, you've got great things coming. God made a promise to Abraham that went through his son Isaac, and then Jacob, the nation of Israel, and then to us as a Jew, and so now it's coming to me. I inherit the promises of God because my blood flows with Jewish blood. And now God's saying, through Paul, you're going to go to the Gentiles. No Jewish blood. You're going to go to the Gentiles and say, you know that inheritance, that promise of good? It's going to you too. And it's going to the Jews not because they've got Jewish blood, but because they will come to Jesus in faith just like the Gentiles are. In fact, Paul writes in Romans, and at this point in his life, just prior to this, chronologically, he's written Romans already. He writes in Romans and he says, you know, it's not that God has forgotten the Jews. That's not the point at all. He has made a promise. It's going to the Jews. There's that inheritance. But now it's going to the Gentiles. And you know what it's going to do to the Jews that this inheritance is now being shared by the Gentiles? It's going to make them stinking jealous. And it's going to actually bring them back to following God in a pure sense. Not saying we deserve it because we got the blood, but because they repent and they seek the forgiveness of sins through the Messiah, Jesus. And they'll come to God on the same terms that every Gentile has. It'll just frost their tomatoes that the Gentiles are getting into the kingdom ahead of them. That's what it says in Romans. Read it. Romans 10:11. You'll see it right there. That's why the Gentiles are part of that as well. Well, that inheritance is also coming to the Gentiles. So here's the whole thing, Paul. You're going to be a witness to what you've seen and what you're going to see. It'll open people's eyes to the truth. They'll move from the domain of Satan to God. And then they'll find, in response, they'll go through forgiveness of their sins because of the payment of what Jesus has done, and they will be inheritors of that same promise that the Jews have strutted around like they were big stuff all their lives. And it'll come to them too. Paul, that's my purpose for you. Can you believe it? Now, do you want to know where we are? Paul's base is still in the dirt right now. And he's hearing this from Jesus. This is what I'm going to do with you. You're going to witness these things, and this is what's going to happen. People are going to move from the domain of Satan to the domain of God. They're going to find forgiveness of sins, and they're going to be co-inheritors of this promise. Check it out. And Paul's face is in the dust, silent, thinking. In fact, this so roiled his thinking. This revelation of this purpose that God had brought to Paul right here, so roiled his thinking. It took years for Paul to get on his feet after this. Measured in years, not in months. Before he finally gets on his feet, he pops up in Antioch to the north after Barnabas brings him into ministry, and he suddenly got his feet underneath him. This just messed up this poor Pharisee's head. Bad. Initially, after this, after he gets his face out of the dirt, he regains his sight because he's going to be blinded in a second. He does go down to Jerusalem and just whips it up when he gets down to Jerusalem. It wasn't really well received. They had to secret him out of town just to get some peace. And then he goes into obscurity for several years, trying to just put this together. This is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to do. So now as Paul is standing in front of King Agrippa, he's saying to King Agrippa, this is what Jesus told me was going to happen to me, and this is what I've been doing. And this is why I'm on trial today. Because Jesus stopped me on the road to Damascus and said, you'll be my witness in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, uttermost parts of the earth. And you'll tell about the truth of who Jesus is. Eyes will be opened. People will go, oh my gosh. They'll seek God's forgiveness as they now are transferred into the kingdom of his Son. They will find forgiveness of sins and abundant life in the inheritance that God has always promised to anyone in mankind who will respond. All those who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. Paul, that's what I got for you. King Agrippa, that's what I've been doing. I just love this. Paul, I want you to relate, and as a result, other people are going to realize what the truth is, and they will finally seek refuge in the God of gods who has always been for their life, and they will receive forgiveness and receive inheritance. Now, in that entire thing, the benefits that come to us that way, how much of that was Paul responsible for? Yeah, pretty much nothing. He just told what he experienced at the bottom. And all the rest of that is something God builds. What a great encouragement to us when it comes to sharing the truth about who God is, who Jesus is. You just got to tell your experience. Who is this Jesus to you? What has he done in your life? Will God do the other stuff? Well, in some cases, yes. In some cases, no. Hearts will stay like stone and they'll be resistant. They won't go anywhere. You may even convince them who Jesus is, opening the eyes, but at that point their will says, yeah, but I think I just still want to live my own life. I don't care that he's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm basically good. And by the way, I like being king of my universe. So that's what happens. Okay, we need to finish off the story here. What's the response? I'd loved it if Agrippa would have just gone, oh, I see it now. And it doesn't happen, does it? Here's the response. First, Festus. Festus has a wonderful response. While Paul was saying this in his defense, Festus said in a loud voice, so I'm going to do this really loud, Paul, you're out of your mind! Which is the way of saying you're an idiot. Paul, you're an idiot! Your great learning is just making you crazy. You know, you've learned too much. It's scrambling your head. You're nuts. But Paul says in a very reasoned way, I'm not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I utter words of sober truth. How about Agrippa? Did he have a good response? I love this. Actually, at this point, after Festus does his you're out of your mind, Paul, kind of thing, Paul is still talking to Festus, but then turns his attention to King Agrippa. I just love this. We got to make a movie of this. He turns his attention to King Agrippa, and he starts talking to Agrippa. The king knows about these matters. Can you see it? The king knows he knows these things, yeah. And I speak to him also with confidence, since I'm persuaded that none of these things escape his notice. This has not been done in a corner, which is euphemistically saying this hasn't been done in private. This has been blasted all over Palestine. King Agrippa, he's been around. So has his dad and his grandfather and his great-grandfather. They know what's going down. He knows, Festus. He knows. Puts Agrippa on the spot, doesn't it? We got to make a movie. Okay. This has not been done in a corner. So, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do. I can feel it. Can you feel the tension in the room as all the heads go and look at Agrippa? Agrippa knows. He's Jewish. He knows these things. Paul's not lying. So what's Agrippa supposed to do? Is he supposed to say, yep, I know all these things? Well, no. Then you got to ask them, why aren't you following like everyone else? You can't say, well, no, I'm ignorant of these things because you're a Jewish king, so you're supposed to be informed. So what do you say? What do you do? How do you duck? You make a joke. That's what he does. He makes a joke right here, and he says, in a short time, you will persuade me to become a Christian. That's crazy. And then Paul, in the midst of trying that deflection, Paul stays on target, looking straight at Agrippa. I got to believe it. And Paul says, I would wish to God that whether in a short or a long time, not only you, but also all those who hear me this day might become such as I am. And then he makes his own joke. Well, of course, except for the chains. I would wish that everyone, including you, Agrippa, as a result of what you hear me say today, I'd love for you to be saved. I'd love for you to understand what I just said. I'd love for you to go, realize who Jesus is. Seek forgiveness of sins. Be transferred from the kingdom of Satan to the kingdom of Jesus. I would love for this to happen for you, to find that forgiveness and find the inheritance that's coming to your people. But I guess it's not going to happen today. I'd love for you to be like me, of course, except for these chains, and I think he's still looking at Agrippa when he does. Of course, I'd love for you to be just like me, well, except for these. Paul's very serious. He's really serious at this point. He wants this salvation. Jesus said back in chapter 10 of Matthew, someday you're going to be standing in front of governors and kings so that they might understand and so that the Gentiles might understand. And today he's standing in front of a king, the great-grandson of the very person who tried to snuff Jesus out when he was a baby. And he's saying, I wish that you could be a follower too. That's my hope. You make a joke, but that's my hope as well. Okay, now we'll wrap up. The epilogue, the king stands up with the governor and Bernice, his sister who lives with him, okay, with Bernice. and those who were sitting with him. And when they had gone aside, so it's a private conversation, they began talking to one another, saying, this man is not doing anything worthy of death or imprisonment. Everyone knew in the room that what Paul was talking about was not something that you can imprison them from a Roman perspective. It's a disagreement in doctrine. That's what it was. And then Agrippa weighs in and says to Festus, you know what, Festus? The irony is that this man might have been set free implicitly today, right now, if he'd not appealed to Caesar. So in the trial you just had before I came into town, if he hadn't appealed to Caesar, we could have snapped our fingers today and said, let him go. But he's appealed to Caesar, so now you're bound to send him on to Caesar. So send him to Caesar. Yeah, well, yeah. And that's the pregnant pause here. There are no charges. We still don't have a piece of paper that says, this man did these things, O great Caesar, you judge on behalf of the great Roman Empire. We don't know what he sent. He had to send something. You didn't send a prisoner to Caesar and look like an idiot governor and say, take care of this guy without saying what's wrong with the guy. He had to say something. Festus is in a bind. We don't know. He had to write something. We don't know what he wrote. But at the end of this, Agrippa is saying, there really isn't anything we can write. Because today, if he hadn't appealed to Caesar, we'd let him go. There is no law he's broken. And Festus just, we don't know. He doesn't write anything. Okay, we need to wrap it up. Next week, chapter 27. And chapter 27, we finally make it to Rome. Well, not really. He's not going to get there next week. But we're going to try and get him to Rome next week. We're going to put him on a ship, send him off to Caesar, hoping that he's got some kind of writ that says what he's gone against the law to say. But he's going to go on a ship next week and try and make it to Rome. And you'll see what happens. Read with me. Just chapter 27, one chapter, and then the week after that we'll read 28, and we'll be done. Okay? He's not going to make it. They're going to send him on a ship to Rome, but he's not. Just going to give you a heads up, he's not going to make it to Rome next week. Sorry. But he's going to try. He's going to see most of the Eastern Mediterranean Ocean, the sea, or whatever it is. He's not going to get to Rome, but we're going to try and get him there next week. Okay? So here's the point. Whether you've seen yourself like I did way back when God gave me his purpose and said, basically, I'm calling you because I want you to speak. And I said, I don't speak. And God says, I know, this will be great. But even at that, I speak. I have no control over how eyes are opened or the response in people's hearts. And neither do you when you share about who Jesus is. You don't either. That's God's job. He did most of that pyramid. You don't. Just tell what your experience is. What happened when you became a believer? Now with me, I can always go back to that little thing about speaking and say, you know what? Before I knew Jesus, I would wet my pants before I'd speak to someone. I'm not kidding, literally. And now, he did something in me, along with a lot of other things he did in me, but one of the ones was, I speak to people. And God did that. I just can't attribute that to anything else. And I can tell so much more about what I've experienced from that day and on to now that I share with people and say, let me tell you about this Jesus. Let me tell you about forgiveness of sins. Let me tell you about abundant life. I'll tell you my experience. I'm not going to tell you about someone else's experience. I'll tell you about mine. And then God takes it from there. You can do that. That's all he asked Paul to do. And Paul could go way farther. He could exposit the entire Old Testament. But God didn't ask him to do that. I just want you to tell what you experience now and for the rest of your life. Simple. And if on the receiving end, this is the first time you've ever heard about this, you can very easily come to an understanding, ask God to give you an understanding about who this Jesus is. That he came for forgiveness of sins, that that's really your fundamental need, is for that forgiveness, because that keeps you out of his kingdom. You're not qualified as a citizen in his kingdom as long as you're sinful. He died on your behalf. The king died on your behalf, that you might find citizenship in his kingdom and find abundant life. If you don't know that, that's all you got to do. Ask him. He makes it abundantly clear. Because that night when I gave my life to him, there was no one sitting there telling me these things. I asked God, God, are you real? I have a future ahead of me. I'm not sure I've got it figured out. Are you real? Do you love? And in the quietness, all by myself, me and him, there he was. So in that quietness, you can do that too. Okay, let's quit. We run way over. Father, we do indeed thank you for this incredible story. You make me laugh and you make me cry and you make my heart jump with joy as I see how you use someone like the Apostle Paul in these ordinary circumstances to speak to people who probably would have never been able to hear the gospel, but they heard it straight that day. And Lord, we pray that that in the places you send us, the natural intersections of life where we run across other people, that you'd give us opportunity just to tell what we've experienced about who you are, just to tell about this wonderful, abundant life we've experienced because we've given our hearts to you, about the fact that before that we were tragically enslaved to sin, dark, not aware of the way things really are. And then you came, you opened our eyes, you brought conviction of sin. You solved the sin with your forgiveness because of payment on our behalf through your death. And now we have life with you because of your resurrection. Lord, make us simple tellers of this incredible truth, and to keep it simple and straightforward. And Lord, we rely on your Spirit to compel hearts to change. And we know that's not our responsibility. And Lord, so many years ago when many of us did give our lives to you, we continue to just thank you for bringing us out of that darkness and bringing us into the light of your Son's kingdom, and to have abundant living as we depend and put our trust in you. So thank you with hearts that are deeply grateful now in Jesus' name. Amen.